This video is a mess. Trying to calculate DPS is a pain. I've already done a video like this and it was good, but I felt that it was lacking the depth that I'd really like to give this topic. Especially when FPS changes your input delay, making some moves take longer at different frames per second. So it turns out the more in depth you look at it, the exponentially more of a mess that your DPS becomes. One quick thing before we properly get started. Most of the talk about limitations and problems I've had testing and so on is going to happen at the end. But there is one key issue that I want to put right at the start to prevent misinformation. What I'm discussing here are optimal combos, and that assumes that you've got enough time to do each combo equally. Strictly speaking, this isn't true to life, as monsters attack you. So if you've got a window of 2 seconds, the best combo for that situation obviously can't be longer than 2 seconds. On one hand, calling these combos the best knockdown combos might help, and that's a great way to think about these combos. However, it's also worth pointing out that the way that Sunbreak Lance loops its combos is through either guard dash or shield tackle, which prevents the monster attack from interrupting your combo, making your combo time or the time for your combo longer. This started off as a video showing the differences between the optimal combos at 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. So let's start with explaining how I got the data, and then we'll move on to comparing the FPS differences. So this data is homegrown. I recorded it myself doing a bunch of combos against the training dummy, and then I dragged that footage into video editing software, cut the footage to exactly one combo, or a little bit longer than a combo, and that would give me how long the combo lasts. The biggest problem is determining when the combo starts and ends, but thankfully all of these combos can loop. So if you start counting the combo the moment damage numbers show up, and finish counting the frame before the next combo's damage numbers show up, you can remove the issue of not knowing when the combo starts or ends, because you can account for start lag at the end of the combo, preventing issues. So I've mentioned the training dummy. In my original video, I just took the damage numbers of the training dummy and thought that that would be good enough. But as I'm making a second video, we might as well get a better resolution of how things stand. So we're going to look at motion values and elemental modifiers instead. So let's look at motion values. I've copied the layout of Titan 6062's table. We'll look at the differences between the combos. For the sake of brevity, I've only looked at the best combos, which means we're not going to be looking at shield tackle, as they're between 5 to 15% worse than the best of leaping thrust. I've also been contacted by the Lance Mafia, and they've informed me that I need to get you all to use leaping thrust. If we just look at the total values of each combo, we can get a reasonable picture of what's best. But just like taking damage numbers from the training dummy, this isn't a full picture of DPS. Monsters don't have an equal ratio of how effective raw and element is. And we also need to factor in that weapons also have a ratio of element to raw, and that's also affected by your armor. So to put it simply, we need to balance three ratios to maximize damage. The combo ratio, the monsters ratio, the weapon ratio. So if we plug the best weapons with the meta armor sets from our previous video into the combos, and then into the monsters hit zones, we get charts that will look something like this. Hopefully that shows up on screen. And with all this work, we can now show that at 60 frames per second, unsurprisingly, leaping thrust, charge wide sweep, and repeat is still the best combo. However, doing all of this does show off one niche case where leaping thrust, high thrust is actually better even at 60 frames per second. In theory, it uses more sharpness, and we'll come on to that later. But of course, the monster that breaks the rule are the crabs. Now, if we drop it to 30 frames per second, that completely flips. It's never worth using leaping thrust, slap, and then repeat, and instead it is overwhelmingly the best choice to use leaping thrust, poke, and sometimes leaping thrust, slap, poke. In theory, it's as simple as that. In theory. This is when things stop being black and white, they get more grey, and there's loads of caveats and issues that sort of throw off the findings a little bit. So let's talk about them, and then at the end of this, hopefully, we'll both be more informed about how we want to use the lance. Firstly, charged wide sweep is difficult to time. The slap is a charge move, and if you release it too early, then it's not going to be charged, and you'll do next to no damage. But you also don't have to fully charge it either. There's a big flash in the middle, and as soon as that flash happens, you've got the maximum damage of charged wide sweep. And so the longer you let it charge after that flash, the lower the DPS of the move. I'm reasonably good at timing the charge, or at the very least I'm consistent. But one thing that will change the findings of this DPS test is if you release the charge later than I do. The extra time you spend charging is going to throw off how strong the combo is. If you leave the sweep charging for about 0.05 of a second longer than I do, or 5 frames at 60 frames per second, then a lot of the optimal combos are going to change, and leaping thrust poke is going to take precedent in high element matchups. The next bit is wacky, and I'm tempted to just cut this from the video because I don't understand it myself. I've not tested it, so take it with a huge portion of salt here, but the slap speed, the charge wide sweep speed, might depend on what lance you're using. As I've mentioned earlier, I'm pretty consistent when I've been playing back these recordings. The time to do these combos normally varies by about a frame, or a 60th of a second. But for some lances, like the Espinus lance or the Aknason lance, they are about 5/60ths of a second faster than other lances, like the Valstrax lance. We could chalk it up to me being less consistent than I think I am, but it's really strange that per lance, the variance is within a frame, but different lances have bandings of time that it takes for the charged wide sweep to come out. In all, it makes me think that something else might be afoot. If anyone else has some insight, I would love to see responses in the comments. This has been really baffling for me. And again, take it with a big grain of salt because it's really weird. Okay, moving on to the second big issue, sharpness. The leap poke combo is 81% more sharpness consumptive than the leaping thrust slap combo. I've gone and tested how many hits you use per second using this combo. Basically, I went out, did a load of hunts using leaping thrust poke, and then averaged how many hits I was doing per second, and it came to around 0.77 hits per second. If we use that and then plug it into the average length of time that a monster stays within an area, we get 185 units of sharpness per area, which is 65 units more than the leap slap combos equivalent, and it's something that we would need to tweak sets around. It's not in the scope of testing for today's video, but adding enough sharpness protection to reach the 185 units of sharpness that you need might lower the damage of the leaping thrust poke combo enough to make using the leaping thrust slap combo and less sharpness protection better overall, even at 30 frames per second. Again, far too large to fully test this hypothesis out, but a quick test using just the Valstrex lance suggests that either spending time sharpening or using up damage skills to slot in sharpness protection makes the charged wide sweep combo better than the leaping thrust poke combo by about 2%, even at 30 frames per second. On the flip side, the issue with this is that different lances have different amounts of sharpness. Some of the lances that we're using are already using Master's Touch, and that may have given them enough sharpness to make leaping thrust poke stronger than the slap combo. It's difficult to know. But in short, sharpness is more of an issue for the leaping thrust poke combo. Another key thing that data like this can't consider is how realistic it is to hit the weak spots. If we assume that leaping slap is the best combo overall, then it doesn't mean anything if you can't use the slap against the monster's weak spot. Rajang is a good example because hitting his head with a charged wide sweep is quite difficult, so it's normally going to be better to leaping thrust poke his face instead of leaping thrust charged wide sweep, but the charged wide sweep slapping his arms. It also works situationally. You might be able to normally slap Tigrix's face, but if you get out of positioning, it's going to be better to do 2 pokes instead of the slap, while still hitting his face until you can fix your positioning and return to Slap City. And finally, like I said at the start, you don't have infinite combo time, so if you don't have enough time for leaping thrust, slap, leaping thrust, but you do have enough of a window for leaping thrust, slap, poke, then that extra poke is still going to be better than not poking. And that's the end. Please like the video, it really helps me out. Maybe subscribe so that you can see more stuff like this. I'd be really interested to see what other people think, so leave comments down below. The more that I look at this stuff, the more complicated this stuff gets. Either way, it's been fun. Thanks for watching, and peace out.